thank our coaches, Ms. Lito and Mr. Halla. They've been very supportive of us. And I'd like to thank our teammates because they're the absolute best. Yay. And then I also like to thank my parents for financially and emotionally supporting me through this. And my friends as well, because they're really nice. And also, I'd like to thank all the female debaters who have paved the way for us to be here today, because they were absolutely And last but not least, I'd like to thank Angela. I'm really sorry for having you having to deal with me for this entire tournament, but it's fine because we're here, so. All right. With that being said, Angela and I affirm, Stanton's of futurism defines basic income as the amount sufficient to secure basic needs. A universal basic income entails that every person in the United States will be delivered an amount above the poverty line, or $1,000 per month. Contention 1 is the American dream. We help working Americans in 2 ways. First, allowing the poor to rise up. The Cato Institute explains despite spending over $18 trillion on welfare, the poverty rate remains close to where we began more than 40 years ago. Because our welfare system is fueled by discouraging work and preventing higher wages, Floyd-19 explains that there's a point where as you earn $1 from work, you lose $1 in benefits. This rate can even exceed 100%, making more work a clearly irrational choice. As a result, the NCSL explains in 2019 the cliff effect can create an anchor into poverty. But it's a simple solution, as Munger explains. A universal basic income continues to give money to individuals even when their incomes rise, and thus people will not be deterred from searching for higher paying jobs. Consequently, it will both provide needed welfare and flatten out the benefits cliff. Kenneth Tanner of Cato explains that welfare prevents people from moving out of poverty, as only 18% of poor people receiving welfare moved out of poverty, while 45% of poor people who never receive welfare escape poverty. Lisa of the Washington Post explains that more than 95 million Americans are in poverty or low income today. Fortunately, Ingram in 2018 explains that in states such as Maine, families removed from welfare had their incomes more than triple within just several years, and that 97% of full-time workers are living above the poverty line. Second is a rising tide lifts all boats. Strawberry explains in 2017 that because a UBI provides a safety net, it allows all people to take risks and create new ideas and innovative solutions. Our society requires basic insurance for all to empower novel ideas and streamline our economy. The numbers don't lie. As Matthews in 2017 explains, a UBI of $1,000 per month would grow the U.S. economy by 13% in the next 5 years, creating 4.5 million new jobs and $2.5 trillion in economic growth. As our economy expands drastically, millions are lifted out of poverty. For these 2 reasons, Fox explains in 2017, a basic income that replaces means-tested welfare will reduce poverty by 40% in America and up to 84% when considering the effects of the benefit cliff. Contention 2 is the automation revolution. The automation revolution is coming as due to the introduction of new robot technology to cut company costs. Monsanto 17 explains that 38% of American jobs will be lost to robotics and AI by the early 2030s. Even if displacement doesn't occur, automation places pressures on wages, as Harris of the Bain explains that approximately 80% of all workers will be affected in the coming decades by some level of wage stagnation or displacement. Unfortunately, Levinson explains in 2019, because welfare programs have strict limits on who can qualify, such as proof of income and employment, many benefits are not available to the unemployed. Lexington Law explains in 2020 that only 35% of unemployed receive any welfare at all. Thankfully, a universal basic income is key to protecting the unemployed and our economy in this transition to automation. As Foley of the Medium explains in 2018, the economy depends on money to circulate. As people lose their jobs through automation, consumption would fall rapidly, reduce sales of strained businesses, who would then employ even fewer people, causing the economy to fall into recession. Muzzle explains that mass consumers lack the purchasing power to buy the goods produced, then the markets will collapse. The only way out of this impasse of chronic underconsumption is a UBI, or preventing everyone with a living wage. Without this buffer, an economic downturn would occur. As Harris of the Bain explains in 2018, that without the UBI, millions of consumers who have lost their jobs to automation are likely to curb their spending. Unemployment and wage pressures may exceed levels following the Great Recession in 2009. When recession hits the United States, the entire world will face spillover effects. As Coates explains, emerging market economies now have greater international interconnectedness to the world economy, which will generate even more spillovers than the 2009 recession. The IMF ultimately concludes, because of the spillover effect, as many as 900 million people could fall back into poverty in the event of an economic shock, just like the Great Recession. And for all these reasons, we are proud to affirm.
Can I see evidence? The 45% people escape poverty with no welfare.
Anything else?
The 1/3 evidence you read in automation.
1/3, 35%.
Yeah, I think so.
Anything else?
I think I'm okay.
Okay.
I'm not sure which one you should do.
Okay, so this one is D35. This is D45%. Yeah.
Okay, so I'd like to keep this short, but this is probably Kevin and I's like last ever debate tournament, and therefore like last debate round. So my thanks are also kind of like a farewell to everyone who's gotten us to where we are today. So first, I'd like to thank Harvard for providing us these opportunities and managing the tournament, like despite the incredible amount of entries there are, and also working with varsity and public forum at this, varsity and JV at the same time. I'd like to thank everyone who's helped us prep and get to here. Just to name: Anurag Atreya, Adriana, Andrew, Asher, Ashwin, Pranab, Rohan, Sai Sugam, Daniel, Trey, Sam, Ryan. Not all at the same time, but overall, in the past few years, they've helped us become who we are and shape the ways we prep. On Potomac, the team and the friends and family that inspire us and we're always around, motivate me because I know there's so much potential after we leave. Jason, Michelle, Karina, Jennifer, Jonathan, Amanda, Vinay, Naveen, Joey, Thomas, Christina, Pranav, Austin. There's so much potential coming out of this team, and I know that even after Ken and I leave, there's going to be a lot more. Also, like everyone else, like is all so incredible. I'd like to thank the coaches. I'm not going to name them, but they're the reason why we are where we are today. Again, I'd like to thank also my parents, my dad, who's always like never really knows what I'm doing at these tournaments, but he still like allows me to come here and do something I really enjoy. I'd like to give a shout out to two people specifically. I'd like to shout out my best friend Adriana Kim, who's always been like an emotional and intellectual support for me. Even though I started to get to know her like more recently, she's always been a good friend and has gotten me through like the rough times in debate and pushed me to continue. Intellectually, she's always pushing me to be a smarter person and work hard, making me the best I can be. And I know she's a great inspiration to so many other people. I'd like to also shout out to Yukiho, who's another one of my really close friends. And is probably one of the nicest people I've met on the debate circuit. She literally works so incredibly hard with everything she does with Beyond Resolve and is always working for it and has sacrificed so much to just try and make the community better. And that's probably one thing I just respect about her so much. And finally, I'd like to thank Kevin. I don't have anything written out here because I know I can give it from the heart. When I moved to Wootton my freshman year, I didn't know anyone. And on the third day of school, a kid named Kenny said, "I think you'd like this Kevin kid." And he was right. These last 4 years, I've been best friends with Kevin, and he's been with me like through every single part of my life. Sophomore year, he convinced me to start debating, even though I didn't want to. But now I'm here, so I guess he was successful. I remember last year, we were always struggling so hard to just like break at tournaments, and Kevin was always working like so hard to improve, and he's pushed me to improve as well. And just to see that we were struggling like to break last year, and now we're here in Harvard finals, just amazing. It amazes me so much. Kevin has literally been one of my best friends, and I've watched him grow not only as a person, maturing as a debater, and as a friend too. And we've improved so much. I'm just so proud of him. I don't want to get too sappy, but If everyone's ready. Thomas Wootton negates our contention one is blowing bubbles. A UBI increases the formation of bubbles for two reasons. First is overestimating demand. Andrew Zuckerberg writes that a $12,000 UBI every year would raise the expected demand for all markets. When investors perceive that demand will increase, the Economic Times explains that they purchase assets believing their value will shoot up in the long term. Unfortunately, investors would likely overestimate how much demand is created by a UBI. Brown of Yes Magazine quantifies that roughly 83% of a UBI would either go towards paying down loans or saving, not actually raising demand substantially. My computer just turned off. Sorry.
No, she's fine.
Yeah. Sorry. Yeah. Sorry. Not actually raising demand substantially. Even worse, Seal of Harvard continues that investors overestimating demand artificially inflates the value of assets, leading to bubble formation. Even worse, the Wall Street Journal explains that all it takes is a few investors to bid up the prices to convince everyone else demand is actually rising, luring other investors into feeding the bubbles. The SF Reserve furthers that fear of missing out on a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity brings inexperienced investors into the mix, which is what happened in the 2008 housing crisis. Overall, because a UBI is such a massive injection of capital into the economy, the room for overestimating demand is enormous. Second is fueling speculation. Because high-income families have low debt and high savings, any money from a UBI would likely fuel speculation. Laudenberg of Business Insider confirms that high-income families would most likely use a UBI to invest and speculate on stock markets. While $12,000 seems small, since it's universal, the aggregate amount of speculation would be enormous. Levinas of the WEF confirms that a UBI would fall victim to financialization, fueling speculation in new financial markets, causing bubbles. Unfortunately, recessions caused by bubbles are the most severe. The IMF quantifies that the worst recession in history was the 2008 housing bubble, which pushed over 900 million people into poverty globally, with developing nations hit the hardest. Worse, this cycle of overestimating demand would not be limited to one recession. The SF Preserve confirms that after a bubble pops, while the period of caution settles in, it is not long before media rhetoric convinces investors that this time will be different, which leads to investors abandoning their sense of caution, leading to repeated bubbles. Our contention, too, is the global poor. Implementing a UBI is far too expensive and would cost $4 trillion. To fund such a large program, we would have to pursue two options, both of which entrench global poverty. First is debt. Developing nations are currently recovering from a brink of a default. Zumberg writes that over 45% of developing nations were at a high risk of default in 2018, but have begun to stabilize. If the US begins a massive borrowing campaign now, it would erase this progress and push these countries into a default. Palmerlo of the Tax Foundation writes that even when accounting for potential economic growth and increased taxes to fund a UBI, the government deficit will increase by $1.5 trillion a year and our total debt to GDP ratio by 81%. When America borrows more money, it does so by selling more bonds. Since US bonds represent the safest asset on the market, more American treasuries available for purchase decreases the supply of lenders for emerging markets as they shift to buy more US bonds. Problematically, Edwards of Business Insider writes that the supply of capital is shifting away from emerging markets and towards US bonds. It means that markets like Turkey cannot find lenders to finance their debt, pushing countries to default. Well, the last time there was a developing debt crisis, Who of Financial Times explains that nearly 125 million people entered poverty. Second is foreign aid. Alongside debt financing, Yeager of the New York Post writes that the government would also have to slash spending to finance the $4 trillion UBI. Foreign aid would be the first on the chopping block. Lanchester explains that while people normally support foreign aid, they turn against it if they think their benefits are being cut instead of foreign aid. Gutting aid spending would be catastrophic for the globe. As Feeney of Oxford quantifies that in the past decade, foreign aid has lifted 170 million people out of poverty and lifts 10 million people every single year. Thus, win the aid.
Oh, it's for cost. Can I see 83% of PBI goes to development? developing countries take on too many loans and they can't pay it back?
It's when they can't pay back on their current debt because they can't sell their own bonds, which are getting outcompeted by U.S. bonds.
So you're saying that the reason as to why this default will occur is because their debt is too high, right? Because if it was low, then they could just pay it back easily.
Are we talking about the U.S. debt or developing nations
Developing
debt?
countries.
Well, they were at the brink of a debt default a few years ago, and have just barely started to
Wait,
recover.
what's the brink then?
What's the brink?
Yeah.
Well, once they can't sell their bonds anymore,
the
they
brink?
can't. What do you mean?
Like, what is the brink? Like,
What does that question
like
mean?
exactly how many investors need to stop buying bonds, or like how many U.S.
Well,
interest rates pull out,
the
or like how
second-
much interest rates do you have to increase?
I can't give you like a magic number of when all the investors are just going to shift over to American bonds, but I say as it increases, it's pretty scalar, and that's why empirically,
You just said it was a brink argument.
It's, what?
You just said it was a brink argument. You said as soon as you reach a brink, and then you said it was a
Well,
scalar.
they only really have to default on one interest payment, and once they default on that payment, then all the
So-
interest rates on other payments also go up. So it's
So
really
why?
like, yeah, it's sort of a brink, but it really doesn't take that much to trigger our impact, and we say that once they shift
so
away
it
from
doesn't take
buying,
a lot to trigger impact, right? Once the brink is crossed, it's crossed, right?
sure.
Okay, cool. Do you have a
Okay,
question?
so on your second argument about a rising tide, you say that there are a lot of safety nets that allow like people to like take more risk.
Yeah.
Okay, so if means-tested welfare programs are worth a lot more than a UBI, doesn't that mean there's a bigger safety net?
Not necessarily, because a lot of people don't get means-tested welfare. For example, if I'm middle income and I want to take more risks, if I get
Okay.
12,000, I can tell.
Okay, cool.
Can I have a question?
Sure.
Okay, let's talk about your housing bubble argument, right? And housing bubble is also a brink argument, right? So how much speculation has to increase for this housing bubble to pop?
Our argument isn't just about housing bubbles, it's just bubbles in general. Are you talking about our first one or our second?
Either one, like what's the brink?
I don't know what you mean when you say what's the brink.
Like, because your argument isn't scalar. It's not like the more like we see speculation, the more we see this like recession happen. No, it's like a very brink
Right,
argument.
so
right?
you're
Once you reach
making
a
you're
certain
making it
point-
sound like it takes a lot for our impact to be triggered, which is why we never reach it. On our first warrant, we read evidence saying it only takes a few investors to believe that demand is increasing, because
as
once they
long
start to
as-
purchase
okay,
those
so let's say
assets,
we don't
the
have
price
a
goes
UBI.
up.
If a couple of investors start believing in like the housing market, does that also trigger the recession?
So the reason why that doesn't really apply is because we've never done such a large injection of capital into
So
our
what is
economy, like a
considered
4
large and
trillion.
What is considered small?
Sorry?
What is considered large and what is considered small?
Well, any like $4 trillion in injection to our economy is pretty massive, and we've literally
But
never
what
done
is
something
the
like that.
comparative, right?
What's the comparative?
Like when is a
There is
injection-
no comparative. We haven't done something like this before.
So
Can I
you're
have a
saying
question?
just because we haven't done it, it will definitely trigger a recession?
Well, you can't compare it to anything else because one, we've never injected this
Okay,
much
sure.
into the economy, and second, we've never done it during a period of economic growth. We only ever do financial stimulus in like a depression.
Okay. I'd also like to just extend a few thank yous. First to all of the Plano West team, the coaches, Mr. Holland, Mrs. Lido. You guys are amazing. You are like, you support the Plano West team in every way possible, and I'm like so happy that I can like be part of such a wonderful program. And to all of the PF teams, there's like 10 of y'all. I'm not gonna name all of y'all, but like, I think Plano West is amazing because we, even though maybe I don't have as many connections to the rest of like the debate circuit, like it really feels like debate's a family because of y'all. So thanks. And then, oh, to Jason, who told me to shout him out in finals when like, hi Jason, I don't know if you're here, but thanks for the motivation. And also to my parents, of course, for, as Alyssa mentioned, financial and emotional support. My parents don't really understand why I like debate so much, and maybe they'll just never understand the appeal of it, but I'm really lucky that even though they may not really get why debate is so cool, they still allow me to go to all these tournaments and have a lot of fun, and debate's a really amazing part of my life. And of course to Harvard for hosting such a wonderful tournament, as both Carla and Alyssa have already said. It ran really well, and I thought that it was just an amazing experience as like juniors this year to go back to Harvard after not breaking last year and realize just
how like big of a tournament, how cool it is. And then finally to Alyssa, like, you said that I like tolerate you. It's really the other way around. She makes me do redos, and like she's really 90% of my motivation to do debate in the first place. So yeah, thank you. You mean a lot. With that, it's going to be 2 general observations about like UBI, and then straight down their case. Are my judges already? Opponents and Alyssa. The first observation comes from Jan of the Washington Post, who explains that right now 13 million Americans who are in poverty and should get access to welfare get access to 0 welfare benefit programs whatsoever. The reason is because our program, the welfare programs, are super expansive and complicated, so as a result, people never apply to these programs. A UBI is the only way you lift these people out of poverty, because right now they should be qualified for some sort of social safety net, but get absolutely nothing. They are living in the worst conditions. That's the biggest magnitude impact. But then, second, Warsaw Law Forbes finds that on average, welfare payments only give $9,000 a year per person. As a result, because a UBI would give $12,000 a year per person, we would contend that on net, the amount of money everyone has to spend into the economy, as well as generally to use to lift themselves out of poverty, is going to increase, even for the people currently on welfare. With that, go into the first sentence about speculation. They tell you in Crossfire it just takes a few amounts of investments for speculation the bubble to completely burst. That's really problematic, because the Guardian finds that over $5 trillion is traded every single day on the financial markets, and the vast majority of it is speculation. They give you no quantification how much UBI actually increases speculation, and if it just takes a little, why does $5 trillion a day isn't enough to cause a bubble to burst every single day? But the links don't make any sense either, because first, on this idea of UBI paying off loans, and as a result, demand doesn't increase. I call their evidence. It's talking about a specific proposal that would force people to pay off their loans using UBI. We would contend that that would be like a condition on the basic income that you have to pay off loans, and Sanders advised basic income is just enough money to provide basic needs that you can use however you want. So in reality, people aren't going to pay off their loans. They're just going to pay for basic necessities like food and supply. So there's not even that difference in demand that triggers a speculation bubble to increase in the first place. On their second link about high-income people, this makes absolutely no sense. Someone who makes $50 million a year is not going to invest any number more just because they have $1,000 a month from UBI. Make them prove how much of a break there is on this argument. The answer is that there is none. Go to their second link. They first say it's going to be financed through debt. First, recognize debt and foreign aid are kind of mutually exclusive. They make them choose one, right? They can't use both to finance. But first, on debt. It's not going to be financed through debt because it legally cannot be. The White House archives find that the Pay-As-You-Go Act requires that any spending bills we pass cannot increase deficits if the bill makes changes to mandatory spending programs. Because Amadeo 20 finds that means-tested welfare programs are part of our mandatory spending programs, replacing welfare with UBI cannot legally increase our debt. That means none of their debt contention matters, none of the stuff with interest rates in developing countries matters, because we would be funding it through alternate mechanisms such as increasing wealth taxes or increasing eliminating inefficiencies in our government. Then, secondly, they say that that is going to increase the amount of bonds. But it doesn't matter if the amount of bonds increases because the people who invest into the developing world do so because they see that developing world is a higher risk and a higher return. They just want the higher return. Compare the developing world's interest rates of 6% and realize no matter how much the US increases their interest rates, the people just want a higher return, never going to move to the United States. And second, interest rates don't even rise because Tammy finds that in empirical history, debt has increased over 20 times since the 1980s. However, interest rates have decreased 8%. The reason there's no correlation is because Kenny from the Wall Street Journal finds that the Federal Reserve controls interest rates based on how well the economy is doing to adjust inflation. They don't do it with any consideration of debt in mind. Then, on the developing nations argument as a whole, they say that investments going to fall is really bad, but Spiro 18 writes that investment into developing countries reached a record high last year, even though our debt increased by billions and we hiked interest rate 3 times. They have no link using actual historics. He continues that the reduced investment in specific emerging markets is due to domestic factors and not external ones. You should prefer actual facts from history over just own logical things that doesn't make sense. But then, go into foreign aid. First, his evidence as to why it would be financed through foreign aid makes absolutely no sense, right? He tells you that if people perceive that their benefits are decreasing, then they're not going to want foreign aid to happen. However, UBI gives every single American $12,000 a year, even the people who currently get $0 from welfare. So if anything, turn this because people get really satisfied with the government and say, oh, we should just increase aid even more. But second, even if people want to cut aid, Brookings finds that there's bipartisan support in Congress from both Republicans and Democrats who never cut aid, even when Trump tried to cut it last year. They literally said no. It doesn't matter what their constituents think. They know that foreign aid is really good to these developing countries, and as a result, they're never going to cut it.
Can we see at home?
Yeah.
Morsel of force?
Yeah.
Can we see the external factors response you got on emerging markets?
Oh, yeah. It's kind of fine.
We're gonna run time starting.
We have 135 total, so we have 125 left. Good.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, I have to do this. Thank you. Okay, so before I do my rebuttal, I also like to extend some thank yous. So I think a lot of mine are also pretty similar to Carter's in terms of like helping the people that have helped us prep, etc. But I'd like to extend a few unique thank yous for myself. First off, I'd like to thank my parents who have done so much. Like obviously they're financing debate and it's a very expensive activity. And even when we weren't breaking or doing well, they would just tell me to breathe and ask myself why I do debate. And after that, I kind of realized that I do it for the people in the community and how much fun I have doing debate. And it kind of just helped me like take a step back and realize that, you know, debate is not all about wins or losses, and it's about, you know, the journey that you have as you become a more mature person. The second thing is also coaches. I think that they not only help us, like when we have terrible arguments, they tell us it's trash, but they also just are people that are just my best friends. I think a lot of times at like 3 a.m. in the morning, I'll just like ask them for life advice, and so I'm really glad they're always there. And shout out to Elisa Chen, who's the best coach and currently runs Potomac, and believed in me when I was just a little shy freshman and took me into the program. I'd also like to thank the rest of Potomac. There's just too many people for me to name, but I love all of you, and thank you guys for being family for so long. And special shout out to Trey and Sam. We prep with them, but they only have one bid, so they need an at-large. So, you know, whoever runs the at-larges, you know, just keep in mind. St. Mary's Hall PH. Okay, finally, I'd like to thank Carter for everything. Coming into my life in junior year, where I had like 11 different partners, and so thank you for like having a big brain as well, and like, you know, picking stuff up. I know that I think you would spend like you would have a lot more fun, you know, doing other stuff like frisbee and stuff, and you like you sacrifice a lot of time to come to debate tournaments. I'm just really thankful you've always been here. And this might be our last tournament, so you know I'm just glad we could go out this way. Just one last shout out to debate for kind of helping me get through senior year and junior year. I don't know how many times I would have I couldn't have gotten through the hard weeks without like, you know, thinking about, you know, Harvard or whatever tournament was going to happen in 2 weeks, trying to just keep me motivated and just keep on going. So thank you so much for debate. This might be our last one, and I hope it's a good one. Is everyone ready? So the structure of the speech, first answering her 2 observations, then our argument about the global poor. Is everyone ready? Time begins now. First off, she says that 13 million people are in poverty and don't receive welfare right now. There's 2 responses. Number 1, we're going to weigh the global poor more important than the American poor. But secondly, more importantly, we say that even if 13 million people don't have access to a lot of welfare benefits, we say for these 70 million people that are things like Medicaid that would lose substantial amount of benefits when you shift to a UBI, on net you're helping the people in poverty more. Their second response says it's only $5,000 per person. Their evidence is very bad because it doesn't account for the fact that a thing like welfare gives actual children a lot of benefits as well. That's why our New York Times evidence indicates that per household they receive roughly $60,000 in benefits when also accounting for helping the children, whereas a UBI would only give $24,000 per year. Let's go to our argument about the global poor. First off, she says it's mutually exclusive. No, it's not. We can both increase our deficit and also cut things like spending. And the warrant for our argument about foreign aid is simply that we cannot cut mean-tested welfare and replace it with a UBI unless we cut foreign aid first. That is our link. They will not let you cut mean-tested welfare. They will demand that foreign things get cut first. The next response says that legally we cannot do it because of things like PAYGO. Well, PAYGO has existed for 20 years, never enforced a single time. This is literally a joke in Congress, which is why this argument does not make a lot of sense. Then, they say that these developing nations have fundamentally different markets and the investors see them as high risk, high reward. Well, we say that when interest rate on bond yields increase because we're selling more of them and basic supply and demand kicks in, that means that our treasuries are low risk, high reward, which is why it directly competes with the developing nation markets. That's why historically our WHO evidence, which is not answer, says that the last time our U.S. interest rates increased, it pushed 125 million to debt crisis. Then they said we've seen interest rates increase, but overall we still see investment go in. But we say that it's all that even though the debt has increased, we haven't seen interest rate go up. Well, we say it's all comparative. We say that interest rate would be a lot higher if we didn't have if we had more debt, which is why even if it's true that the interest rates are going down, they'll be going down a lot faster absent the deficit. Then they say the Federal Reserve controls these interest rates. Well, this is the federal funds rate, not bond yields. Don't let them conflate the two different interest rates. The bond yield interest rates are what cause developing nations to go into these recessions. And also in their argument about external factors, our empirical evidence answers this back. Then on our argument about foreign aid, they say it doesn't make any sense because we're giving everyone a UBI and that there's no perception that they're really satisfied. No, they're saying, why are you funding a UBI by cutting mean-tested welfare? Cut foreign aid first, right? That is the thesis of our argument that they have missed completely. But secondly, they say there's bipartisan support from Congress. Well, that might be right now that there's support because they don't perceive that there's a domestic trade-off of resources like mean-tested welfare. When you definitionally affirm the resolution, you cut mean-tested welfare, which is why the political shift then kicks in. This is going to outweigh their argument on severity because we say developing nations are the most important, they're the most vulnerable. The reason why they can't lean into our argument about emerging markets comes from the New York Times. It indicates developing markets are relatively not that interconnected and also sell demand inelastic goods, which is why the last time we had a recession, they bounced back within 1 year. Then our argument at foreign aid, the New York Times indicates that LDCs, which are least developed nations, don't import or export. They have very low domestic industries, which is why they're not connected to global markets. Once again, foreign aid helps these countries specifically. They're the most poor. Let's go to their case. So, just one overarching response. The New York Times indicates the United States is currently at full employment, which means any increase in demand will not be met by supply, which is why inflation will only increase, and it will actually, if anything, force the Fed to hike interest rates, which causes recession because it causes current malinvestment to go boom. On their first warrant about increasing overall investment, there's two reasons why, if anything, on their argument about welfare cliffs, there's two responses. First off, the EITC actually encourages people to get benefits when they work more, so obviously there is no welfare cliff. But secondly, the New York Times indicates that on it you get so much money from going onto a job, which our Sarah Evans indicates in statistical analysis that it had zero effect on actual poverty. On their argument about the safety net, we say you can actually turn this argument because Seaman explains that when these people take more risks, it means that they're more likely to fail. So banks have to increase interest rates to compensate. This makes loans a lot more unsustainable and actually creates the bubbles that formed in, for example, the 08 recession that pushed the housing crisis and pushed 900 million people into poverty. On their argument about automation, there's a lot of responses here. First off, Jamie explains that automation will gradually happen over the next 25 years, giving people time to adapt. My point is really overblow the argument about automation. But secondly, they say that you have to do work requirements in order to get qualified for welfare. That's not true either. The NBC post states and says SCOTUS literally 4 days ago shot down the Medicaid work requirement, which is literally the biggest mean-tested welfare program. This is why people like disabled people that really have a hard time finding jobs are still being benefited by Medicaid and helping millions of the most vulnerable. But finally, we'd say that our argument about foreign aid is also going to outweigh in terms of vulnerability and severity because we're impacting the people that are the most poor, that need the money a lot more. Every dollar goes a lot farther there. Yeah. Yeah, sure. Yeah.
And that they're like not very.
The last thing is the term on the first about things
Yeah, sure. So, one at a time. have to recoup all my losses.
We'll just take them after.
Okay, you wanted to see the interest rate rise?
Yeah.
Yeah, we don't use inflation.
Oh wait, is that the interconnected card?
This is the interconnected.
Oh, I thought it was like looking at it. Wait, I thought it was another card there, and I was so confused.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. Oh, yeah. Okay. The one that says like this response.
The interest rate rise.
Yeah.
That was a minute. Okay, customer. Wait. Yeah, customer. Okay. Can I have the first question?
Yeah.
Alright. Can you just like read the Lancaster evidence that you say for foreign aid links to me?
Okay.
Or I guess like just say it. You don't have to like
Well, I already said it.
yeah, sure. Can you just like
Yeah,
'cause
so
I want to make it
to
really
like summarize it, it just says that while in theory, voters generally support foreign aid, if it believes it comes at a trade-off with domestic resources like welfare, then they demand it to get cut.
Wait, it's that they believe that if their benefits are going to get cut, then they will let the trade off, right?
Yeah, when their benefits are being cut, like
Okay,
domestic
so
resources.
for the average American, right, there's like 300 million Americans like in our society. Even
Okay.
for the ones who are not dependent on welfare, like that's still a majority of them are not dependent on welfare. If they get $12,000 a year, isn't that increasing the amount of benefits they get?
Okay. I don't
So-
understand how this responsive to the argument.
Right, so my question is, if a UBI increases the benefits to every single American, why would they then get mad at the government for decreasing their benefits and say we should cut all foreign aid?
Well,
right?
yeah, so there's two things, right? So first off, we were saying the people that are on welfare right now, which is roughly 80 million people, for example, on Medicaid, will be the ones that are demanding the change. That's a lot of millions of people that are demanding the shift. But secondly, more importantly, say a lot of middle-income families that aren't receiving welfare still know relatives or people that might be on welfare, which is why they're like, look, why are we cutting means welfare for my friends and my family, like my friends, even though, you know, we could be cutting things like foreign aid. In fact, the majority of Americans perceive that foreign aid is roughly 33% of our budget. In reality, it's a lot less. But the whole point is that people believe that foreign aid makes up a huge portion of our budget.
Okay,
When we decide to cut means welfare and
So-
not things like foreign aid, then that's when they demand the
So just to clarify, it's contingent on welfare giving more benefits to people on welfare than a UBI.
No,
would,
they're
right?
just like, you could, okay,
No, like-
for a normal person, they're like, you know, we could fund a UBI and means welfare. Why are we cutting means welfare
Right. But in
and
order
not
for
cutting
people to
foreign aid?
feel, in order for people to feel like their benefits are getting cut out, you have to win that welfare is going to give
No,
more to these people.
think
than
about it this
UBI,
way, right? It's
That's
that
just
their
logic.
benefits could have been a lot higher if we didn't cut means welfare and
Right,
we just
so it
kept
depends
means
on
welfare
you
and a
weighing your
UBI.
benefits.
But
That's
the
fine, you have a
wait, okay, sure. Let's talk about your case then.
Okay.
So let's talk about your argument about safety net. So just walk me through it here. Is it just that with $1,000 people are more willing to take risks, right? Because they have $1,000 to have a kind of like a cushion.
Our second contention?
Your second more on your first argument about American Dream.
Oh, it's just that in general, UBI stimulates the economy and increases growth by 13%.
Wait, but you tagged it as it's a safety net and that it
No,
encourages
I think it's
innovation.
rising tides for all.
Oh yeah, okay. So you said it's basically a safety net, right? And it encourages innovation because
It's
now people have
basically just-
$1,000 more.
Like kind of. It's
Okay, sure.
basically-
You can ask a question.
Okay, so let's talk about this like $9,000 versus $29,000.
Yeah, sure.
You told me that family of 3 with like 2 kids gets $29,000, right?
No, it's
Oh,
that
like under
an
welfare.
average household receives roughly $60,000 in benefits.
Wait, you told me in rebuttal it was $29,000. What is it
I don't think I said 29. I said $60,000 per household, whereas a UBI would only be $24,000 per household.
Welfare
Because
gives
only if you,
$60,000 of benefits?
to a household of 4,
Okay.
yes.
Okay. The point of my question is, you agree with the Stanton's evidence of cover case for the definition of basic income, right?
That's a 100.
It's $1,000 a month for every individual in America.
No, it's only for citizens above 18.
Wait, why? That makes no sense.
Because
So,
almost all proposals would do, are that's what they
I mean,
propose.
kids are people too, right?
Well, yeah, well, that's not our argument. The argument is that politically, like in terms of political feasibility, all
Why
the
would they
proposals
not
that currently exist are
politically
only for 18 and above. I could cite you like 5, and that's not.
Okay. Yeah, can we see the 60,000 evidence?
Yeah, sure.
Oh, it's fine. Okay. Yeah.
It's going to be quickly on top of the Ned case, then on the second contention, then on app, addressing the turn, and then the app and then wait. Sorry if that was confusing.
Oh, wait, can I understand that?
Yeah, can we have this?
Okay, where is this starting again? Okay, okay.
Starting on your case.
Okay.
Is anybody not ready? Starting top, what Morgan explains is that average UBI is $12,000, while the mean size of welfare is only $9,000. They say that the federal spending is $125 a day or $60,000 total. But their evidence talks about government spending, not how much people actually receive. We would say that the people actually receive is much less because you don't have stimulus or like stigma against welfare. With that being said, we concede that developing countries really important. Let's go to their case. Their first strong argument talks about debt, but the Tanner evidence explains there's no correlation between debt and interest rates. Despite the fact that debt has increased like 20 times in the last couple of years, we saw interest rates decrease by 8%. He concedes that interest rates are on net decreasing. At that point, it doesn't really matter even if we're mitigating like the decrease of interest rates because on net debt is still not going to have, like the investors are not going to pull out. But the second response on foreign aid is their own evidence explains that the reason as to why they want to cut foreign aid is that their own benefits get cut. However, we would say that giving 100% of the population $12,000 is obviously going to make make Americans a lot more happy, and they wouldn't like cut foreign aid. It makes no sense. Okay, let's go to the affirmative side. Go to their first contention. They first read the turn about mortgage rates, but let's talk about their evidence because their evidence says that the only thing they're going to decrease is loans. I don't see how this ties to recession. You can delink this evidence right there. But the most important argument is called the automation revolution. What the Moss and Naka evidence explains foundation explains because it's 3 times faster than any previous revolution, it'll be very, very fast paced, and that's why there's no time to adapt. Then this is key because Livingston explains that only 35% actually get any benefits at all from welfare, which is why they're not going to have any wages at all. They say that ultimately, Medicaid has already solved work requirements, but first, we would say that overall, the AAPPA explains that Medicaid never had work requirements in the first place, so the 35% already takes into account. And second, we would say that Medicaid doesn't necessarily cover spending in general, right? You still can't spend on things like food or basic necessities. With that being said, what Mondo explains, because the economy is chronic underconsumption, the only way that you actually increase consumption in the economy is through a UBI or giving everyone $12,000. That's key because Hart explains that overall, if we don't put a UBI in, a recession is going to be as great as the Great Recession. We would say this outweighs their case on a lot of reasons. They first tell you that the global economy is not interconnected with developing countries. First, their evidence is talking about stock markets being recovered. That's the same thing as GDP growth. The GDP growth is severely hampered for developing countries, for those of people who are for many, many years after the Great Recession. The second thing they say is that it's not interconnected. We would say that obviously the global economy is very interconnected. It makes no sense. Here's a couple of reasons why we outweigh. First, we would say that developing countries default into debt means that IMF can always bail them out. The United States default or the United States recession doesn't mean a bailout. But second, Basil explains as soon as the United States defaults, all the investors lose confidence in the developing markets and they immediately pull out and go back to the United States. That's key because that's going to trigger a debt crisis. Third, because Norris explains that aid significantly goes down in a global recession. We would say that aid cutting from every single country besides the United States is more than just the United States cutting aid itself. But third, Elliott explains that there's going to be a 40% decrease in trade in terms of the global recession, which is going to hurt the developing countries the most. That's key because trade is the only way you actually become developed, not things like foreign aid, because the foreign aid has never lifted a country out of or developed a country before.
Okay. We're gonna run prep time starting.
Okay. Structure is going to be, starting on the top of our case, going to contention 3, like all the weighing that happens in this debate, and then going to their case.
Contention 2.
Yeah, contention 2. Is everyone ready? Okay. start off on the argument about who receives more money, whether it's welfare or UBI. We read evidence from the New York Times who indicates that means-tested welfare programs give $60,000 per American, which is a lot greater than the $24,000 per household they'll receive. They say that it's a lot less in our world because of things like stigma. But 80 million people are getting means-tested welfare programs in the status quo. Obviously, stigma is a big deal. You definitely prefer our evidence on specificity. Now, let's go to our contention two about the global poor. Our second argument about foreign aid. This is where you're going to be voting for us. The only response they extend in first summary, which is straight through ink, is that $12,000 a year makes people happier, so they don't want to cut things like foreign aid. First of all, it's about total benefits. They don't understand why you have to cut means-tested welfare programs to get UBI. They don't understand why they can't do both. That's why they say you always cut things like foreign aid first. But they also drop Kevin's both front lines. First, it's that people on mean-tested welfare get really upset because they get a lot more benefits on welfare instead of UBI, but then people on the middle income don't understand why their friends and family are getting all their programs cut. So we both agree that the best impacts are going to go to people that are most severe, like in developing nations. We say that in the last time there was a debt crisis, people came out in a single year. They say our evidence is about stocks. If they read the next paragraph, it would indicate in other places because the things they sell are super inelastic, like food, they always come back very quickly, which is why they bounce back in a year. We say a recession is very short term. But even if they do link into our argument with a recession, we still outweigh in two ways. First is magnitude, because our evidence from Oxford indicates that aid has lifted 120 million people out of poverty. Their only argument about that gives a number is saying it's like the Great Depression, no quantification. But also on time frame, because at best they only solve for one recession, but we give aid for the indefinite future, which means we're a lot greater. Then she reads 4 pieces of defense, which she disguises as weighing. The only one that applies to aid. This idea is that when during a recession happens, they cut down aid. Empirically, simply not true. We never cut down aid during a recession. That's the only one that responds to our argument. So let's go to their case. Even if you buy everything they say about recessions having a bigger impact into the global poor, we win on recessions for 2 reasons. First, at the top, because the New York Times evidence indicates that we're at full employment, which means any more demand cannot be met with supply because people aren't able to be more productive and get jobs, which is why there'd be inflation. And when there's a lot of inflation, the Fed has to increase interest rates, which has caused the global recession. They say our evidence only talks about loans. It's not true. Call the evidence. It says that overall demand is going to increase inflation, which causes a recession. The other place you vote for us is on their second warrant about a rising tide. It's the drop turn that comes from the Seaman evidence, which indicates that when there's when a UBI happens, middle income people feel like they can take more risk. So what they do is go to the banks and they take more loans and more investment. However, because it's a lot more risky, these banks cannot differentiate whether it's good investment or bad investment. So because it's so risky, they hike up interest rates. Why this is another warrant into the recessions is because when the interest rates are so high, other things can't compete. And again, when interest rates are super high, no one else can compete. That causes a global recession. So it's pretty clear we went through foreign aid on this developing world overview. But even if you believe recessions do buy in, we're also winning on recessions, which is why it's a super clear neck ballot.
Can I have a question?
Yes.
To be clear, the New York Times evidence says that currently, right now, we're at full employment, right?
Yes.
Okay, cool. No problem.
Wait, so how are you going to implicate this? Because you didn't respond to it at all during summary. We don't think it's fair for you to answer during first final focus.
Well, I'm not gonna. The way I'm going to implicate is by extending my own case, right?
Wait, so how do you?
It's not a new argument. My entire second contention that our narrative throughout this entire round is that people, because of the automation revolution in the next decade, are going to get a lot of their jobs displaced. 40% of their jobs get lost, and 80% of them lose wages. That's
So the evidence from James that you don't respond to says that automation gradually happens over the next 25 years, right? So maybe if you're going to say like, oh, deflation will happen in the long run, which counteracts inflation, that's in the long run, right?
Alyssa frontlines this by telling you, with the TechCrunch evidence, telling you that this AI revolution is going to happen 3 times faster than any other industrial revolution in the past.
How is that
And
responsive? The
why
evidence
it's
says
not
that automation
25
will only
years.
happen in 25 years.
Look, if all our evidence tells you it's just in a decade, and your evidence tells you it's in 25 years, the only way we can compare this is by comparing the war.
Wait, really
The reason
quickly.
why an AI revolution is going to happen really quickly is because right now we are on the brink where this AI and technology is becoming really cost efficient. So
Yeah,
in the
sure,
next
sure,
decade, that's why right now companies like Amazon and companies
Okay.
like Facebook
I
are investing
understand, I
millions of
understand.
dollars for these.
Right, so we both agree that at
You
least.
guys don't extend the defense, right?
What?
You guys don't even extend the defense, right? So it's pretty
Wait.
unfair for you to bring it
No,
up.
no. Okay, wait, really quickly, just want to clarify. So we both agree that automation at the very least will take 10 years. That's your own evidence.
No, it happens in the next decade by 2025.
That's what,
The
Like,
next
if it was
decade is
8.
2030.
yeah.
Yeah, 10 years. Okay, you can
Can I
have
have a
more.
question?
Wait,
Yeah.
no, can we take a question? Because that was
You asked me how
No,
was it?
it was.
Oh,
Oh yeah, wait.
your question, right? Because you asked us a question about the overview.
Oh,
Do you
yeah,
have a
yeah,
question?
okay, sorry.
I asked you for the question, you said you asked me how to explain it. That's okay, you can have a question.
Okay, so let's talk about where foreign aid goes, right?
Sure.
So for a lot of countries that are very underdeveloped, for example, like least developed countries that don't import or export, doesn't foreign aid compromise a majority of their budget?
Not necessarily.
Wait, why?
Like, you give me no evidence that these countries don't do any trade. That tells you, like,
Wait, so let's talk
trade,
about...
if trade went down by 40% in the Great Recession, it's obvious that they're not trading in the
Well,
slightest.
yeah, 40% trade goes down for like maybe developing nations, right? And that's in general. But
Yeah.
least developed countries, which are the poorest of the poor developing nations, these are countries that don't have globally competitive markets, that aren't exporting or importing, right? That is why we'd say that in terms of severity and helping the most vulnerable, these areas are the ones that you should be prioritizing.
Like, I would argue even the poorest of poor nations still are going to get their food from, like, trade and exports, right?
No, that's just generally not what happens because a lot of these sectors are very globally, like, okay, in order to be globally competitive, that means you need to be able to outcompete a lot of these developed countries with much better technology. If you're a domestic firm in any one of these countries, there's no high productivity labor because there's no education in these areas, no schools, no opportunities. That is why our evidence indicates that these countries are not importing or exporting, zero trade flows. And you can ask a question.
It's like 5 seconds left, so.
Okay, it's fine.
I don't know where I was looking for that table.
Alright. I'm going to be talking about foreign aid and then automation and then design.
First, on this foreign aid link, recognize that at the end of the day, it depends on who gets more benefits as a whole from welfare or from UBI. Throughout the entire round, we tell you from Warsaw, the average American only gets $9,000 from welfare. Their evidence is talking about cumulative government spend, and call for it is talking about the government spends some amount of money, but when we tell you the actual evidence tell you how much the people get is only $9,000. What this means, because the UBI is $12,000, on that, even the people who are in welfare will not feel like they are missing out, rather they will feel like this amount of these types of welfare being cut and UBI being implemented has only increased their benefits. So from their own Lancaster evidence, foreign aid is going to increase. It makes no sense if you give 300 million Americans $12,000 a year, they're going to think that the government is screwing them over. It's obvious that foreign aid is going to increase in a world of UBI. But even then, they drop the weighing that wins us today's round directly on foreign aid because they themselves, let's just tell you from Norris, that when you have a global recession, for example, in the 2008 recession, aid goes down 30 to 40%. And the reasoning why this is outweighs all of their stuff is because it's a global recession, so it's aid from every single wealthy country, which outweighs all the aid that America could give more. So even if you believe that the way you should be voting is off of aid, you vote off of the automation recession. On automation, or first they give these two terms, they say that we're at full employment right now, they also say that people are going to take risks. Group these together, recognize that our narrative is that in the next decade, the automation revolution pushes 40% of workers out of a job and lowers 80% of wages. If that's the case, we're no longer at full employment and no one wants to take risks anymore. Rather, what the UBI does is it acts as a supplement. Because wages are now decreased, we allow these workers to still spend into the economy. And as a result, that's why Munder 16 tells you that if we don't prop up spending by implementing a UBI, these markets are going to completely collapse because no one can buy into the economy. And Harris explains that this is going to be worse than the 2008 recession. This is a crucial link because we tell you a lot of recessions happen, but most of them are not anywhere near as bad as the financial crisis of 2008. But the IMF finds out it pushed 900 million people into poverty. The second weighing mechanism comes from Rousseau, who tells you that as soon as a U.S. recession happens, these people, the very people they talk about who are investing in developing markets right now, the first thing they do is pull out immediately. This is always on time frame because it happens as soon as the recession starts to emerge. The reason is because they fear that there's going to be a global market collapse, and that triggers all the debt crises that happen on even the poorest countries that they're implementing to. Oh, yeah.
it's just going to be 2 voters, recessions and foreign aid. We're going to start on recessions. Is everyone ready? Time begins now. We think this round is pretty much over. Even if you believe recessions is the biggest impact, we are the best link in that for 2 reasons. Number 1, we tell you that currently we are at full employment, so any increase in demand means that you increase inflation, you force the Fed to hike interest rates way too fast, it causes current malinvestments to become unsustainable, which is cause a wave of loan defaults that causes a global recession. The only response they make is new and first final focus. They see the narrative that they push means that automation will eventually mean that there's people who are going to lose jobs and there's no longer full employment. Well, they can see themselves during Crossfire. Automation takes many, many years. They see themselves the fastest is a decade. We see that $4 trillion injection of UBI in terms of capital happens immediately. The demand increases immediately. These interest rates happen immediately. That's why the recession we were talking about immediately triggers. They're not answering the warrants that we give. But secondly, we also tell you that when you give a UBI to these middle income people, before this automation boom happens, these people start to take more risks. Bank increases interest rates to compensate for the higher risk, and that means these loans become more unsustainable, which is why they're more likely to trigger a wave of defaults. This is exactly what happened in the 2008 housing crisis. We are controlling the best link into this housing crisis or this recession my opponents talk about. But let's go to foreign aid. So, we say that whenever you cut mean tested welfare, the people are like, why are you cutting mean tested welfare when you should be cutting foreign aid? They say one thing. They say we're overall making Americans happy by giving them $12,000. Number 1, they're not answering the comparative, right? These people think we get both a mean tested welfare and a UBI. So they're asking, why are you cutting mean tested welfare to replacing it with a UBI when you could just be cutting foreign aid and having both programs? That is why overall creates the political shift that our Lancer's evidence indicates would force them to cut overall aid. But secondly, we also say that the middle income also sees this as well because they see their fans and relatives or family and relatives who also are on welfare no longer have access to these benefits. That is what overall catalyzes them to demand more overall aid to be cut. They make one response and they say overall that they're going to link in because aid actually decreases 40% during a time of recession. No, that's not true. They say that trade goes down by 40%, not aid. In fact, our New York Times evidence indicates there's zero correlation between recessions and actual aid being given. But finally, they said trade went down by 40% and there's no investment. But we are talking about landlocked or these least developed countries that have no investment in them, have no infrastructure, have no domestic industries. Foreign aid is the only places that are going into these areas and lifting tens of millions of people out of poverty. In terms of severity, we're helping the poorest of the poor. They cannot link in. Thank you.